Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out podcast. It's a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their best, most authentic lives. I am your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast could not be possible without the support of Careerminds. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Danielle Smeltzer. Danielle is the founder of Awarely, a company that blends real-life experience and trauma-informed practices with actionable strategies so you can reclaim your well-being at work. Danielle saw firsthand how stress and burnout can negatively impact leaders, teams, and organizational progress. It's so interesting to learn how Danielle experienced this chronic pain herself, but she was able to reclaim her life to pursue her own mission. I just love her inspiring story and how she is pioneering how we approach stress in the workplace. So without further ado, please enjoy Danielle Smeltzer and her clocking out story. Danielle, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to see you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I was just reflecting here. You and I connected, I guess, maybe a month ago, 2 months ago now. You had heard Jillian Climby's podcast, and you had reached out. And I have to tell you, I am so glad you did, because I've listened to your podcasts. I've been following you on LinkedIn and reading your work. And it's just impressive, first of all. And there's so much, and I'm going to use the word alignment because that came up on one of the podcasts that I was listening to. There's so much like intersection between the work that you're doing, the guests that you're bringing on. And it really, when I think about clocking out, the Awarely, the alignment is almost like those two thoughts coming together is really the driver of what causes people to make a change in their life and to clock out of their situation. And so I am just grateful that you reached out and that we're having our call here today.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm glad you picked up on that. Those are all the things that, brought me to exactly where I am now and to reach out to you. So it's good.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Danielle. And I always like to start from the beginning. Our listeners love an origin story. And I'd love to kick things off with you sharing where you're from, where did you grow up, what did your parents do for a living, and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, it's always fun. I'm getting better at telling my story. So
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. I grew up on the West Coast of Canada, so I'm a quintessential West Coast person. When I'm not working, I am out with the dogs, I'm gardening, I'm hiking, I'm fishing, I'm surfing, I'm all the things. But I grew up in a very entrepreneurial, outspoken family. Our dinner tables were about business strategy and the latest political saga or whatever social event was happening. And it was all about dynamics and challenging each other and big, bold conversations. So you can see where I got that spirit from today. And I started working quite young. I think I started my first job when I was 11, working for the family firm, quote unquote, for my family's company. Started, cleaning bathrooms, and then worked my way up to putting things together for workshops, and then eventually worked in the office more on like the frontline side. But yeah, started entrepreneurial journey pretty young.
Wow. So tell me about, what was the family business? What exactly did your parents do?
Yeah, my dad was a lawyer, but unconventionally, like myself, took an atypical approach to it as well, and worked in the big firms, but realized that wasn't a fit. And so started his own company doing contract law training. So basically, anyone who works with contracts, how do you actually do that legally and ethically and in a way that actually makes sense to drive business? So he worked on the procurement side, training public and private companies with how to do that, and a lot of government work across Canada.
And did your mom work for the company as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was both my mom and my dad and myself, and then my sister when she was a little bit older too. So we all worked there over the years. Yeah.
Wow. So how old were you when you started working at your parents' company?
I think my first unofficial job was probably around 11, But I would say I was a board of director slash advisor from the age of like as soon as I could talk, really.
Okay, so you have one sister, is that one? And
I have one sister. Yeah, she lives about 5 minutes from me. So 5 minutes from me. And then my parents are 5 minutes on the other side. So she's equidistance between both of us, which is quite nice of her.
what's the age difference between you and your sister?
3 years. Yeah. Yeah. So
And you,
I'm the older, wiser one.
okay. Okay, great. I love that. So, and I'm asking all these questions because it's just to get a real perspective of like the family dynamic. And I'm curious whether, like, you're 11 years old and you're working for the family business. Was that a decision that you said, "Hey, I want to get involved," or were your parents like, "Hey, we need someone to file and do things around the office, and this is going to be your summer job"? I'm curious how you were sucked into the business.
I think it was just an organic, natural progression. There was always this integration of work and life in the way we lived. And um, I am one of those people who actually loves working. I
Hmm.
love learning and love just participating in things. So it was a really natural thing for me to do. I also had jobs outside of the family firm too, but it was, yeah, it was a really natural thing for me to do. So they did not push me into it. I certainly took that opportunity on myself.
What would you say is the biggest takeaway, the kind of skill that you developed and you feel like you learned as a result of working for your parents' company that, as you reflect back, has played itself forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think I developed project management, organizational skills, budgeting skills by the age of, 13 or 14.
Oh, wow.
A lot of skills which, a lot of people are learning for the first time when they start their businesses or later in life. And so I feel like I kind of had like a reverse engineering of my adulthood and childhood. I'm learning to be a kid now, but I learned how to be an adult pretty young.
Mm. And how long did you work for your parents?
All the way through university, actually. So whenever I had a little bit of a break or, a reading break or whatever it was, I'd pop back in summer holidays, support them with whatever was going on.
So I have to ask the question. So there's obviously great takeaways for those who either are thinking about getting involved in their family business where there are challenges. I mean, you were there for almost a decade.
Yeah.
What would you say is the challenge of, considering, like, really thinking about going into the family business? Like, what would you say people should consider?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be pretty clear on boundaries. I was always in the situation where I was in and out. So, I had either school to go back to or a different job to go back to. Um, for me, I was clear on that at that point in my life, that's what made sense. But I certainly saw the challenges that came up in my relationship between my parents too. Of the boardroom table was in the office, but then also at the kitchen table,
Mm,
and so just being clear on those types of things, and also being really clear on roles and responsibilities too, and balance. Like there's some really good things. My parents were able to come to any sporting event. They were the chaperones on every school trip, those types of things. But there was also the fact that work never ended. It was always there, always a permanent part of
mm.
work and life were just blended.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I feel like you're um, at an early age, the fact that you talked about boundaries, like really
Yeah.
thinking about, where does work start and life begins.
Hmm.
And I can only imagine as you're reflecting back, I mean, you worked in a professional environment. This wasn't a family business where you were just doing, kind of like unskilled labor, so to speak. And you were really part of the think tank of the company. You talked about the
Hmm.
boardroom table. And so there sounds like there was a ton of benefits to it, but you had to be really intentional about how you separated your work from life. Did that play forward in the corporate world for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, I look at it as kind of I did my real school, my real learning outside of school. So
Mm,
whether we were traveling or I was working in the family company, that's really where I learned a lot about. human dynamics and behavior and planning and project management, all of these things that you're supposed to learn things in school, the practical things, but you're really not. That was my
Mm,
experience anyway, was that you really do learn those things outside of those walls, and that was the approach that my family took for sure.
mm. So was any of the work that you did leading to your degree and what you decided to pursue in school and ultimately impacting your career?
Yes and no. My life took some pretty big changes in my mid to late teens. So what I wanted to aspire to be early on in life, um, the universe had some different ideas from that, and so I had to majorly pivot. But yes, I think every part of our lives contributes to who we are, whether it's exactly how we intended it to be or not.
Yeah, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. From the age of, well, as soon as I guess I had cognitive awareness, I wanted to be a professional athlete, actually. So my path was all about becoming a professional soccer player. My dream was to represent Canada in the Women's World Cup. And I was on my way there with at age 14, on my way to nationals. And that's really kind of the first stage where you could get, international recruitment or getting more visible. And 2 weeks before nationals, I had an injury and I never played soccer again. And so that was a complete pivot, obviously, from my trajectory. And that's when I
Mm,
really was able to step into a lot of the skills I'd learned through actually working for my parents' company. But ultimately, I went to art school, which was completely different because I needed a little bit of a break and something completely different. And that was another set of skills I had, was I was quite creative. So I actually majored in site-specific installation sculpture and a minor in business, or unofficial minor, I should say. But yes.
mm. Wow. I can only imagine how traumatic that experience was with an injury that you're on this pathway to be a professional athlete and the injury just completely takes you off course
Hmm.
of your dream. How did you like, I guess, how did you recover from that? I feel like there's moments everyone faces, whether it's early in life, mid-career, late career, that there's something that just happens unexpectedly.
Hmm.
And how did you mind sharing? How did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the whole journey of how I got to where I am now. Um, an injury seems simple, It's like, okay, great, I have an ankle problem. But for me, it turned into chronic pain, which then turned into chronic illness. And this was, I don't want to sugarcoat this. This is like a 20-year journey for me to work through. It did not happen overnight. It's exactly why I started Awarely, 30 years later or whatever, wherever we are now. Um, yeah, I'm pausing because I don't want to make this a simple answer because it's not.
Mm,
It took a lot of time and a lot of energy, and I think it's still something I'm working through in some ways. It's like as we move through our career and our life in different ways, we take all these chapters with us, right?
mm,
I don't think we really ever fully get over things. I think it's we learn to integrate them into our lives in different ways. Was it
mhm.
awful? Yes. Do I regret it? No. I mean, it's who I am now. And had I not gone through that adversity and challenge and, several decades of really trying to reimagine what I wanted for my life, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you today.
Right. That's so inspiring. I feel like a person's identity evolves, and I was digging into that question because I had a feeling that this wasn't like, oh, I just broke my ankle and I'm not going to play soccer anymore. I mean, this was a new identity that started to take shape, and I wasn't thinking it was going to be a 20-year journey, but I had a sense that it was so impactful just because of how you described
Hmm.
the passion that you had around soccer and the fact that you wanted to, um, go to the Olympics and represent Canada. Like you had some big aspirations, and the
I
fact
did.
that the universe obviously had different plans for you. Um, so the the fact that you've been able to, sort of evolve your identity and kind of incorporate that as part of who you are today and not separate yourself from it, I feel like there's so many life lessons there for people. I was researching your background, and I want to just bring up a couple of points. You have such an eclectic background, by the way.
That's a
You
good way of putting it.
you really do. You work for a marketing services company. You work for a beverage retailer, cannabis retailer, stock photography, in a variety of different roles. Like there, and by the way, I couldn't find any sort of path that connected back to liberal arts other than the fact that you dream big, you have big ideas, and you're not afraid to learn new things and kind of adapt. And so, I'm curious around how you've sort of grown and learned through the various careers. And I know it's a big
Mhm.
question, but you've done a lot, and obviously now you're running your own company. But I wonder how you thought about postgraduate, graduating from college. Like, how did you enter the workforce and kind of think about these interesting, kind of careers?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my teachers I did quite well in university, and I got a full ride, and, you know, I was on the track to be a professional artist, which is what they try and teach you to do in the school that I took. But I knew I never wanted to be a practicing artist. I wanted to be creative in different ways and innovative in different ways, and that's what art school really taught me was how to think and how
Mm,
to communicate and how to overcome adversity and how to show up in the world in a very different way. Think out of the box, all of those different things. And I was always coming from an entrepreneurial background. I was always fascinated by entrepreneurs with their vision and just the way that their brains work. It's not entirely how my brain works, but I working with my parents, I could see how to articulate that into something that actually worked. And so that's been my like collective career narrative has been helping visionary leaders and entrepreneurs translate their dreams into an actual business and a strategy and operations and people leadership or sales and marketing, whatever it is. I'm the person who goes in and goes, okay, let me digest all of that from your brain and let me figure out what that actually looks like in reality.
hmm.
And so that's kind of been my superpower of that creative aspect of being in art school and translating that into the business world.
So it sounds like it was almost intentional. You had this real discipline around your experience from your parents' business at an early age, and you got exposed to all the operational things around the business. And then it's almost like the arts degree provided you with sort of the right brain on, it's like balancing your approach to your career. And I think it sounds like it was very well played. Um, so how did that play through to where you are today in terms of like, when was the moment did you realize that I'm going to make a shift from working for a company in some capacity, whether it's sales and marketing, operations, human resources, or even
Mhm.
running the company,
Yeah.
to clocking out and doing my own thing?
Yeah. Well, I will acknowledge that I don't know if it was intentional to begin with, my career narrative. I can understand it now. I've always just been driven by curiosity and whatever brings me joy in the moment and where I can add value. But the real turning point for me was during the pandemic, as I think for a lot of us it was. I was leading up operations and HR and finance for a international tech company. I was where I thought I wanted to be, check executive title, check all the things. Um, but ultimately, what people needed was very different during that time. Overnight, our lives had changed. There was so much social unrest. There was so much fear, so much uncertainty. And over the period of my life going through various things, I invested a lot of time in understanding a lot about my nervous system and regulation and ways to support myself in different ways. And suddenly that was what everyone needed.
Mm,
And so these skills of strategic planning and project management, none of that mattered. And so it was this very table flipping moment for me of I can bring who I am personally and what I've learned through my own challenges into the workplace. And I'd seen a lot of other people struggle with stress and burnout, and companies being really adversely impacted with that over my 16-year career after university. And I realized there's a different way I can do this, and there's a different way I can support other people to do this. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a slow thing. I spent a couple of years doing a lot of training and then was able to take a step back and step away from the organization I was working with and took a sabbatical, went back to school further, and then, yeah, launched Awarely earlier this year.
wow, that's amazing. So when you talked about how you were working in a variety of kind of corporate type positions, and it sounds like there was a grind to it, and there was almost like each of the jobs that you were in, as you reflect back, there was almost a stress and anxiety, a pressure. And I can only help but think the work that you're doing today, you're sort of like you're better informed around how you should treat your body. And for those listening that are in that kind of situation today, what advice would you give them if they're not at a place where they can make a change in terms of how do you navigate a career or a job where those forces exist? Like how do you manage that? So what advice would you give people?
Yeah, a lot of my focus right now is on giving people the space to question what they've been taught or learned or, accept as real around narratives with success, with worthiness, and what it actually takes to make a career what we think it should be. And I think it's starting with those bigger questions of what does worthiness actually look like to me? What does success actually look like to me? What does well-being actually look like to me? And I'll be the first to admit I am incredibly driven. I am extroverted. I will always be very intense about work. I just come at it in a different way now with
Mm,
more intentionality, more alignment, more authenticity. It doesn't happen overnight, but it started with those really hard questions of what do I really, really want? And then starting to learn the language of, like you said, of my body, like what is it actually saying? Because burnout did happen to me, and I know that my long history with chronic pain and chronic illness was obviously like highly tied up with all of that as well. Yeah, but it starts with those big slash simple questions.
mm. So how do you define burnout? Like I want to dig into that
Yeah.
because I feel like people can relate to the work that you're doing, and I just wonder
Mhm.
how does that show up for you?
Yeah, I can tell my own story with it. I mean, my major tipping point with burnout when I was about 30. I was an executive for a retail slash hospitality company. Um, I'd been with them through a period of massive growth, and seemingly overnight, I ended up on long term disability. This is not actually overnight, but it hit me over the head. I had ignored chronic pain and chronic illness for a long time, and I had basically pushed through my entire life of the injury to university to starting my career. So, my first 10 years of my career. And yeah, burnout for me manifested in being diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which, if you're not familiar with that, is basically like a catch-all um, chronic inflammation, chronic pain thing that is really quite devastating. And that's how it showed up for me. And it's been taking the last 10 years of my life, which is also where Awarely started, was dismantling all of that. And I now live like essentially 98% symptom free.
Oh, wow.
So we're out the other side now.
Wow. Unbelievable. So I appreciate you sharing that. I feel like the relatability that people have in their jobs, I feel like there's just so much of that. And it sounds like COVID was the catalyst that
Mm-hmm.
essentially positioned you to leave your most recent company before you launched your
Mm-hmm.
business. How did you get to a place where you were comfortable quitting your job? It sounds like you didn't have a job to go to, which is incredibly brave, in terms of being able to support yourself and, having, kind of the financial needs that you needed in order to take care of yourself. How did you do it?
Well, I will acknowledge I'm incredibly privileged, obviously, and very lucky that I was where I was at. I was able to negotiate an exit actually with the organization that I was in. We were going through some pretty major financial difficulties, and I essentially proposed eliminating my role and saving three other roles. So it was obviously benefited me in this space that I was at. But it aligned with the organization at the time. So there was some strategic negotiation that happened there. But also, I am really lucky to have an incredibly supportive partner who believed in me and knew I needed to make a change. Um, I'd also been pretty smart from the years of working for my parents, of saving and investing, and
Mm.
I've had I had a something to bounce back on from there. I've also been doing some consulting too while I build my company. But I don't want to say that it's easy. It's not. We talked about worth, we talked about success. I've had to relearn all those lessons again of having inconsistent paychecks and not having that title. It's not easy, but it's very worth it.
Mm. I can only imagine the confidence that you've been able to build, through that process where you've unraveled all the stuff from your, 10 to 15 years working in corporate. You had all of this sort of internal trauma that was, probably keeping you from being your most authentic self and living your best life. And the fact that you transitioned through that, you have this identity today that is a culmination of all of the work that you've done over the years, the support that your parents have given you in the early stages of the business. And you made a bold decision to go out on your own and pave your own way. And I can only imagine how free you must feel as a result of that. Like, kudos for the bravery that you had taken.
Thanks. I talk a lot about learning to hold space for the fear and the anxiety that comes with these major life changes, but also the joy and connection and just amazing alignment that comes with it. Like I don't want to I want to acknowledge that both of those are part of it.
Mm.
Very true.
Yeah, I want to also underscore, the idea that, um, this uncertainty that you talked about, where, you're not knowing where your work's going to come from and the anxiety. That's, from my perspective, that's good in anxiety. Like when you're in a place of alignment and you feel like you're in sort of this flow state where things are just clicking and things are working. Obviously, stress is going to come up, challenges are going to come up, but when you have, sort of the capacity. Oh, by the way, I absolutely love that you call yourself the chief capacity officer, because I think it's so fitting, because you're essentially, when you're in alignment, you have the capacity to do so much more in a way that allows you to be productive, but also gives you the space to be able to handle those challenges that come up.
Mhm.
It's different when you feel like the challenges are part of your everyday and you
Yeah.
can't seem to make sense of it all. And so I really love that kind of articulation of that transition.
Thank you. Yeah, that was a brainstorming session with an entrepreneurial friend. It was like, this is what you do. You help people build capacity to have more meaning and impact and alignment. I was like, oh, okay. Thank you.
Hmm. So Danielle, how did you come up with the name Awarely? And when did that idea start to blossom after you left your last company?
Yeah, I think it was almost exactly a year ago where I started doing brainstorming sessions. I went on a little retreat and locked myself away for a few days and got a whole bunch of books and started to articulate what I wanted to do of helping people bridge this gap between work and well-being and kind of shifting the narrative on success, and really didn't quite know what it was going to look like. And then was like, oh, this is like, I want to call this embodied leadership. Turns out that's actually a thing.
Hmm.
Who knew? There's some people doing it in the States and the US. Um, but I wanted to take a slightly different take on it. My background is also somatics, so working more on like the trauma informed approach to leadership. So I wanted to integrate that with my corporate background. So I can't take all the credit for it, but I hired an incredible graphic designer who I'd been working with throughout my career, and she actually came up with the name. So it's essentially a blend of, like you said at the beginning of the interview, of this awareness and alignment. And the squiggly line in the brand is actually to represent the neural pathways. So as we shift and evolve and change in our lives, it's this rebuilding of these neural pathways.
When I think about my career, I had, you know, trauma and, things that impacted me at an early age, which led me into my career and got a lot of experience, but I don't feel like I was in alignment. And I guess, when you think about Awarely and how you describe your mission, like how much of that is a result of intention and introspection as well as coaching? Like, I'm curious about your perspective on that.
Hmm. I'd say it's an ongoing evolution. Like my intention is certainly towards empowering people with more awareness, but I would say that the work that I do is a practice. There is no end goal. There is no end result.
Mm,
Obviously, as we work on building awareness, we're understanding our patterns and behaviors and stressors to be able to make more informed decisions. But I don't think it really ever ends. Um, that's certainly my approach to my life too. Is you find more intentionality through increased awareness.
mm,
Do I always know what I'm doing? No, that's not the point. The point is when we screw up or we get stressed out or something bad happens, we can step back and go, oh, okay, let's look at that with some intentionality and then make a decision from there or learn from it. It's not about being perfect. It's
mhm,
about building that greater capacity for awareness.
mm. Yeah, I feel like it's also vulnerability, being able to not only recognize, but feel like you can share what your observations are, what you're observing, when you really take a step back
Yeah.
and you do that introspection. I think part of the willingness to pivot or make a change is being vulnerable and recognizing that, no one's perfect. And I feel like sometimes, especially with social media, there's a projection of what's happening externally without a real understanding of what's happening internally. And it's just so interesting as far as how people show up in the world.
Yeah, that's so true. My whole brand is about telling the real stories and through my own lived and learned experience, which has been humbling and very vulnerable. But ultimately that's what people relate to was here's how I screwed up, here's how I learned, and here's what I'm doing differently. Oh, and then I screwed up again. And that's what makes us human is this, this shared experience. We're all just doing the best we can, really.
Hmm. So when you think about your 15 years of work, you've launched your business now. It's been about a year since you've founded Awarely. What would
Mm-hmm.
you say as you reflect back? And for people that are thinking about, um, really looking at, their awareness, their alignment, and potentially
Mm-hmm.
could be contemplating making a change. What was the aha moment that you had that was sort of the catalyst that, people that are listening could recognize as a sign that,
Mm-hmm.
I can do this? And then what are you experiencing today that acknowledges that?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, it was a number of things. My body was talking to me. I had long COVID and it wasn't going away. And so that was my body speaking very loudly again. So that was an internal thing I needed to listen to. Um, it was also there was life and world events that collided in a way that I had an opportunity to step away, and the world was changing. There was a lot of things lining up that meant people were having bigger conversations about leadership and life and well-being, and just felt like the timing was right. So there was a couple of things that combined there. And then right now isn't without its challenges, but the way I show up, the community I've built, the connections I've built, and just the way I feel every day of living essentially free of chronic illness and chronic pain is wild. Um, those are the things I have to remember every day, even though I don't know exactly what's going to happen next, or I don't have all the answers, but I wouldn't have it any other way.
That was beautiful. So well said. I love that. So, Danielle, I have to say, I was looking online and I noticed that in several places you have lead plus live with live in parentheses. And I'm curious
Mm-hmm.
why live is in parentheses.
Yeah, one of my biggest things, and I think I did a post about that today actually, was uh, we're all about talking about work-life balance. I think that's great that people have that intention towards that, but my whole thing is let's not separate work and life. Let's not separate leadership and who we are. I think it's Brene Brown who said like who we are is how we lead. I'm all about dismantling those whole polarization and boxes and things like that. And so when I have conversations with leaders, the first things I'm asking them to do is like, who are you? like, like, let's not talk about title. Let's not talk about, all the things you've done in your career. Let's talk about what makes you who you are. And so that's why I talk about leading and living, because there is no separation between the two.
Hmm. I love that. I feel like leaders today need to lead with the heart,
Mm-hmm.
and asking that question of who you are really requires you to go deep and really think about who you are. And the people that you're leading want to know, where's the heart of my leader, not just the mind. And so I love that you're focusing on that. So Danielle, we're going to wrap up. What's the best way people can find you?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I try to post non-traditional LinkedIn things that actually talk about real heart and leadership. That's where I tell a lot of my stories. Or you can also find me at awarely.ca. That's my website. Got lots of great resources on my own podcast, blog, and practice videos on some of the things I've talked about. Lots of great options there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And for those listening, I can tell you the podcast is fantastic. I've learned so
Thank
much
you.
just in the last few weeks from the guests that you've had on. And thank you so much for carving out time here today. Your story is amazing. I love how your identity has evolved to the person you are today, and the work that you're giving the world has so much impact to it. So appreciate you sharing, and thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, and thanks for the space to have these conversations. This is what the world needs.
I appreciate that. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Careerminds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own personal journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well as find me on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage yourself to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.